glorious revolution. Holcroft had decided, as had millions of his fellow countrymen, that King William and Queen Mary were de facto and de jure rulers of the three kingdoms. These Irishmen were therefore rebels. This peace conference with them today in Carrickfergus would likely lead to a surrender of the town and the evacuation of all defenders. The rebels would be allowed to march out of Carrickfergus with arms and honour intact, and the French spy, a man known by the codename Narrator, would march out with them. General Schomberg had initially demanded unconditional surrender from the defenders, an offer which had been considered for the longest time before being politely refused. Holcroft knew, as well as the Duke did, that these Irishmen, more than 500 militiamen, had been ordered to delay the English army for as long as they could. He also knew that if they chose to be stubborn, the defenders could draw this siege out for weeks or even months. After initial success for James's forces in the north, the Jacobites had been driven south, when overwhelming numbers of King William's troops, English, Welsh and Scots, as well as Dutchmen, Germans, Danes and soldiers from other northern European lands, had been gathered in England and dispatched across the Irish Sea. The old town of Londonderry, or just plain Derry as some local people called it, which had been besieged for 3 months by the Jacobites, had been recently relieved by Colonel Percy Kirk and his brutally efficient infantrymen, nicknamed ironically Kirk's Lambs. The demoralised forces of James, many of whom were poorly trained conscripts, were retreating south. All that prevented Schomberg from following on their heels to crush the rebellion once and for all was the defiance of this isolated Irish garrison. That was why the half-German general would most likely agree to almost anything the defenders of Carrickfergus asked. And both sides knew it. Schomberg dared not advance south to confront the main part of the Jacobite army if it meant leaving an enemy force behind him that could threaten his communication lines. It was now late August, and autumn and winter were at hand. The fighting would grind to a halt in October or early November when the weather turned bad. The armies would go into their winter quarters to ride out the cold and rain in as much comfort as they could manage. If the Duke of Schomberg could not vanquish James before the Irish winter stalled the war, he might never beat him. The Stuart king was recruiting fresh men from all across Ireland to his banner. And Louis XIV of France, the most powerful monarch in Europe, who had already committed 6,000 troops to the Jacobite cause, might raise another army and then send them across the sea to bring aid to his fellow Catholics. Schomberg had to winkle the rebels out of Carrickfergus fast. If that meant allowing all defenders, including Narrator, to march away unharmed, so be it. Holcroft understood all this, yet he was still furious with his commander. He had come to Ireland with the express intention of finding Narrator and bringing him to justice, or, if that could not be arranged, then dispatching him speedily to hell. He had petitioned the Duke, begged him, in truth, to be allowed to accompany the royal train of artillery as second engineer, and Schomberg had at last agreed to the appointment. But now, just when Holcroft had his enemy trapped and at his mercy, the general was about to let him go scot-free. Holcroft let out a long, heavy breath. He tried to concentrate. "I am very pleased to hear the buddleias are blooming, and you may certainly invite a dozen of your friends around for a tea-drinking party in the garden, should you so wish to honour them. Unfortunately, I am unable to tell you very much about the flowers here in this northern part of Ireland, since much of the lands about these parts have been devastated by war. Indeed, the Jacobites have burnt all the surroundings of Carrickfergus almost to the ground to deny us cover, and so the landscape in this region is now very ashy and bleak." The white canvas flap of the tent opened, and a lean and dirty officer walked in. "Blood," he said by way of greeting. Holcroft's response was equally laconic. "Richards," he replied. Jacob Richards was dressed in the same blue ordnance coat that Holcroft wore, with the distinctive yellow turned-back sleeves. But his coat, his once